Hello, welcome to week 4. This week we're going to finally get to the point where we've taken some of our content and turned it into what we'll call information. And I know that's taken quite some time, and appreciate everybody's patience with it. I want to let you know that that particular journey is a big part of being an information architect, to take and understand the content that you're given and then be able to look for patterns within it. So if we look at our own work, this was week 2, our mural, what you can see is that from a content perspective, it's pretty rich. From a organization perspective, it's pretty much nowhere. So we talked a little bit last week about Gestalt principles, only to say if you were looking at this information, would you say, okay, everything that is orange is related to each other? Now, a human might do that because that's the way we're built to try and understand things, but if you looked at it, you'd find it quite puzzling. So I wanted you to look at your data or your table of content and see if you were missing some things or if you saw some relationships that didn't mean anything. And the point being that you can go ahead at this point and add, let's call it imaginary data, and I can show you an example of that. I'm not asking for you to go out and scrape more data, but I think you can add to that to make more relationships so that you can then learn to manipulate it. So if we went to this week, we are attempting to be a bit more organized. So in this case, there is a different feel to things. There's a couple of constructs that I created, one of which is from Mural, where things just line up a little bit neater. And that's these two questions. You also saw we used a classic 2x2, which also helps organize people's thoughts. So as we move forward, we're going to look to organize our murals in the same way we're organizing our data. So there is a method to the course structure. So let's talk about this week. This week is going to be about HTML. And so if we go to our module, let's see. It's going to describe pretty much what HTML is. If you're not familiar with it, I'm not asking you to become an expert on it. You're just going to become an expert on taking the relationships that you've already explored and just giving them a common name and structure that is provided to you by hypertext markup language, or HTML. So let's not worry about this being programming. It is not code. It is just markup. Markup is there to add information. So I want you to understand what it is and how it works. And there's some explanation as well as some resources just to show you what the tags are. And there's two important readings. They're at the bottom of the page, but they're also contained in our mural. So if you go into this, there is some important reading. I think Daniel Mull's article about why are we doing this is important, and that leads to some questions to you about separating out the visual aspect of HTML from its background. There's a fairly lengthy article about systems that is really good if you're interested in going a little bit deeper, and just the idea that the look and feel of a web page is separate from its markup, which is kind of illustrated fairly well in this evolution of a web page. It's pretty good. So as we talk about HTML, we want to get out ideas about why are we marking up, what does it provide, and then there's some tutorials. So the tags are there. There's a cheat sheet if you want to just look at all the tags. This semantic elements is our goal. We want to mark things up semantically, so these are our key markup elements. So in order to produce this week's deliverable, which is your database marked up with 3 example records, just a repeat of one record and just repeat it 3 times with different data in it. When I first started this, I talked about the whole point is making lists, and lists look like this. And you might be surprised if we ran this. So this is a nice little HTML editor. It helps you a little bit. This isn't, again, too much about how these the mechanics work, but I found that JS Fiddle is pretty easy to look at. I'm not interested in this part. I'm only interested in HTML. And what you see over here is basically what looks like a bulleted list, because that's the default look and feel for this particular structure. But you'd be shocked to know that probably almost all of the web is marked up like this. And why? Because we talked last week, similarity. When things are similar, you put them in a list. And we can take a look. I think I might have some examples in the slideshow about every site is made up of maybe 10, 12, or even more lists in its HTML. But what we're going to do this week is learn a little bit more about semantics and HTML5, which allow us to do more elaborate things and just be more specific about what it is, header, section, etc., rather than what it looks like. So I'm not concerned with what it looks like. I'm concerned with what are the tags we're going to put in there, and this gives our first salvo into meaning and information. So this is actually what, if you're familiar with searching on Google, Google doesn't know anything but the tags that you use. So that's why we're learning it, because most of our work is seen by other computers, not by people. So what goes on underneath the hood, so to speak, is extremely important from that point of view, being searchable and findable and so forth. You can also see there is another service called CodePen. You can use this as well. It's nice. I like JS Fiddle. It's a little bit cleaner. If you ever wondered, sometimes if you turn off CSS, you'll find this is what most of sites look like. As I was just showing you, they're just lists. And talk a little bit about semantics. So far, I'm working with ingredients for making perfume, and I've just found another source of data. So in our second, we talked about merging sources of data. This one is called Fragrantica. What I found is it's an enormous database of, well, quite a bit of stuff. So you can see here they've taken and created every kind of smell they know about. And if you got to a kind of smell, you could start here. Or if you started with a perfume itself, let's see if we went to this perfume, it would tell you in their data structure kind of all the different notes, what people thought about it, what you would smell within it, and even a kind of a size, like as more people said it smells like cucumber, this gets larger. So and there's reviews. So now I'm thinking I need to merge these two together, but this gives me a lot of ideas about what extra things to add to my database. And I want you to do the same. I want you to make sure that you've got enough data to mark up to make something usable and sortable, and so we can start to think about what structures we'll need in order to organize this information. And that's where we go here. So when we talk about our markup, please share early if you feel like this is something that's easy for you. In fact, speaking of easy, if anyone is intimidated by this, I marked up my own ingredient list here. You're pretty much welcome to just copy and use this structure exactly as is. If you have more information, you can use it, or if you want to use different tags, that's great too. But this is definitely a starting point about how to think about how these things will work. For example, I've got something here called a picture. You might not have a picture in your database, but you can represent it here by using the picture HTML tag. And that link is right here. It's got my face on it. Also, just to let you know, later we're talking about flexibility. So this is just how we go from a table view, and we're going to start to create different views. Table views can be useful in some respects. Maybe that's where you started. You started with a table of information or of content, and we can start to sort them. And this is just an example of how that works in iTunes. And then lastly, We're going to talk a little. We're going to use a meta tag, which is another HTML tag, and we'll talk about more about meta level information later. So that's the goal for this week. We've got some talk about, how is this working for you? If this is something that's really challenging, let me know, and we can all help out. Marking up with tags should feel a little awkward at first, but when you see there's a syntax to it that JS Fiddle helps you do, which is opening tags, closing tags, and that's pretty much all we're looking for. We don't look for a lot of nesting, although here you can see I'm using article to nest the entire thing, and it'll do a nice job if you want to use the tidy command to kind of keep this a little bit neater and a little bit more readable. And if you want to go actually look at site HTML, I know a really good one. You might like this site or not, but if you look at the HTML, you can go to the inspect area, and a lot of HTML is pretty much what I'm talking. Like this one is pretty good that it's talking about an article. You don't have to worry about this word class, but in the article there's navigation. It's using the div tag, which isn't particularly helpful for us, but it is a tag, and it's actually fairly clean and easy to read. So if you never saw what it looked like, you could probably figure out what things are just by the HTML. So again, I hope that helps, and I might do a Blue Jeans session if we're seeing that we're not moving forward fast enough or this is too challenging. Just as I said, post your work and let me know in Mural. And have a good week.